Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Best of SEJ Summit webinar series. Today, we're going to be joined by Eric Kwan, who you can see on the webcam right now. Eric is the Webmaster Relations Specialist at Google, and he's going to be talking about a really interesting topic for all of us, web security and manual actions, which I'm sure everybody is going to have questions about, and we already have some questions in advance. My name is Brent Satoris, and I will be moderating today. I'm going to give Eric a chance to kind of introduce himself, and then I'll go through some housekeeping notes. Eric, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So as Brent said, I'm a Webmaster Relations Specialist at Google. I worked with Gary, John, Matt Cudds back in the day, just helping webmasters learn about search, improve their websites, improve documentations, make sure everybody's getting answers in the forums, things like that. Most recently, I've been working on a lot of things related to website security, but in the past, I worked on the manual actions team, so that's something I'm very familiar with. And I've been at Google for about 7 years, originally from Texas, and that dog in the picture is not my dog, unfortunately. I get a lot of questions about that. I just thought it was a really great dog, and could made it for a nice photo.
So you just grabbed somebody's dog in the park?
Well, it was my friend's dog, so it wasn't just a random dog.
All right, so quick housekeeping notes for everyone. If during the webinar you have any questions, comments, statements, things you want to ask or say, there is a chat and a questions section at the bottom of the GoToWebinar control panel where you can enter in your questions. We will have a Q&A at the end of the webinar like we always do. Slight difference on this webinar is that we sent out some feelers to a lot of different people to get some questions in advance. So Eric has received those questions, and he is going to run through and answer some of those questions at the start of the Q&A, and then we'll open it up to everyone. But I did want to let you know that it is going to be slightly different in that regard. We do our best to make sure that we link any resources, tools, or any kind of information that Eric might mention. If we miss something, by all means, please ask us about it in the question box, and we'll make sure we get that resource or that link or that reference to you. After the webinar, please stick around. We have a really short survey that we always do, and we get the results back the next day. We always review it as a team. We look at what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, what could be improved. So it's a short survey, but your feedback is really influential and really helpful for us in making sure these continue to get better each time we do them. Lastly, the entire webinar will be recorded and made available as a recap post on Search Engine Journal, so definitely check that out if you want to see it again, you want to reference it, share it with your boss or your colleagues. It'll be there for you. So without any further ado, Eric, let's dive into this webinar.
Thanks, Brent. So today there are three main takeaways that I want you all to take away from this presentation. Number one is to prioritize web security. Extremely important. The number of sites getting hacked every year is going up. So prioritizing web security is going to be the main focus of this presentation. Number two is to follow Webmaster Guidelines. That's pretty common sense. I think everybody's pretty familiar with the Webmaster Guidelines, but we're going to go over some basics of like misinterpretations of the Webmaster Guidelines, what certain things in the Webmaster Guidelines actually mean. I know there are a lot of questions about certain ways that we phrase things that I really want to clear up. The final thing is just don't overly fret about manual actions. I know a lot of people, when they're working on their site, instead of focusing on great content or focusing on their users, they can get a little bit too concerned about getting a manual action on their site. And I know that's scary, but I really just want to make sure that everyone understands what a manual action is and what it isn't, so that you can kind of get a better understanding of it, so you don't have to always be thinking about it when you're building your website, because we do want webmasters to be focusing on content and not always focusing on whether or not you're going to get a manual action. So let's first talk about some website security stuff. There are a lot of different type of website compromises. These are just a few. So spam website compromises are still the most common. That's when people inject links onto your site, or they inject pages onto your site. So when someone is searching for your site, Instead, you get a whole bunch of Viagra or pharmacy or bad content on your site. And that's because hackers are trying to leverage your site. They're trying to leverage the reputation of your site in order to get their bad content to rank. The second type is malware. Malware is really dangerous for your users. If there's malware on your site, we show this big red interstitial. And the reason that we show that is to make sure that users don't go into your site because there's potentially something that could harm them on your site. And that's why malware has such a big warning, is because it can really harm users. And that's something that you really want to be aware of. If you have malware, you really have to maybe even just take down your site temporarily until you get that fixed, because it's going to harm you, your users, people that go to your site accidentally and don't really know what's going on. The last two right here are kind of new trending things. One of these things is credit card skimming. If you run an e-commerce site, there's the potential that there could be some code injected onto your site that skims credit cards. So when users are typing in their credit cards or the credentials, either they get moved to another page, kind of like a phishing page, where they're putting their information and sending it to someone, like stealing their information, or there's some type of system that stores that credit card information and sends it to the person who hacked your site. So these are really hard to detect, and it's something new that we're still learning about right now. But it's something to watch out for. If you notice it on your site, if you notice anything weird on your site, if users are reporting something, look into your e-commerce platform and check if there's something weird going on. Go read the blogs about your e-commerce platform. Make sure you're up to date on everything security related on your e-commerce platform, because losing credit card information of users is really bad for your reputation. That's really bad for your users. And the last thing that we've seen on the rise these days is crypto mining. Hackers will inject 1 or 2 lines of JavaScript. It's that easy, where they just inject a couple lines of JavaScript onto your site and they start using your users' resources in order to mine for cryptocurrencies. And this has reportedly caused a lot of issues with mobile phones, things with limited processing power. And so crypto mining for users, there are legitimate ways of using crypto mining. Like if you tell your users, hey, instead of using advertisements, we're experimenting with cryptocurrency mining, and have your users opt in. But there's a lot of times where hackers will inject it onto your site without you knowing, and it's going to negatively affect your user experience and your brand. So all this is just to say that you have to make web security a priority. We're going to go into a couple of tips on what you can focus on, things that you should look at. But first and foremost, just make sure that web security is a part of the plan when you're building your website, because hackers are constantly attacking your site. If you doubt that, just go into your log files and just see how many random people are trying to ping your admin pages, trying to log in with generic admin/password combinations, or poking at certain plugins on your site to see, is there a plugin with a known vulnerability, or are you running a CMS that's outdated with a known vulnerability? I think you'll be surprised if you look at your log file and how many people are just constantly prodding and looking at your site in order to see if there are any of those vulnerabilities. These are bots, they're not humans, so they're just kind of unlimited resources. They're just running all the time, crawling all these pages. So your site is basically constantly under attack, which is a crazy thing to think about, but that just means, again, you have to make web security a priority for when you're building your site. One weak link really can break the entire chain. You can have everything else secure, and we've seen this with really big websites, global attacks on global websites, where it's someone had one admin/password combination that they didn't change on an admin account, and suddenly the hackers have access into your site through that one admin account. So one weak link, be it an outdated plugin, be it just one outdated page, or a variant of your CMS running that's outdated on your site, can really break the entire chain, and you really have to make sure that every piece is secure. And finally, no one is immune. We've seen big brands get affected. But I think it's kind of the opposite mentality for smaller sites these days, where they're saying, hey, my site's not that important. No one's really using it. And that's totally not the right way to think, because again, hackers are just prodding at anything. They don't really care about how big or small your website is. They just want a vulnerability. They just want a way into any type of website in order to add their content. Because the more sites that they can hack, the more sites they can compromise, the more money they can make. I want to have a quick word about social engineering, or like a variant of it, which is phishing, one common variant. I think social engineering is one of those things that everybody is very aware of. You've gotten these scammy emails where it say, hey, click into here to log into WordPress, and it's from like a fake WordPress user. Click here to log into Joomla, and it's like it sends you to a fake Joomla login website. And I think inherently everybody says, I'm tricked by that. I'm savvy enough. I've looked at that. But there was never going to be a study done a couple years ago, and 45% of the most believable phishing sites trick almost half of the users. And that's a lot of people. So again, it's not necessarily just about you, the website owner, the designer, whoever you are in managing your website, but there are a lot of people who have admin credentials to your website, be it your boss, be it someone that's working on the website with you. You need to make sure that everybody is really well educated about things like social engineering, and that they understand that there are people out there trying to steal your website credentials. The other scary fact is 20% of hackers within 30 minutes of getting phished access your website. So basically, as soon as you lose that information, as soon as you're phished, you have a really small window. You have a really, really small window of recovering your site, changing all your passwords. So again, you want to make sure that prevention is there. This whole conversation really is about prevention. You don't want to be fixing things after the fact. You want to be preventing things before they even happen. So why should you care? I mean, if your site is hacked, it prevents users from accessing your site. And that's kind of the main point of your site, right? You want people to be able to use your site. So if, like, for example, a hacker puts malware, you get that red interstitial for users, and users can't go to your site. Or there's some type of script redirecting your users, or there's like a crypto mining script that's crashing users' browsers or crashing their computer before they can even use your site. It compromises you and your users' data, and I think that's really important. That's like one of the most important things, because when you get compromised, you're not too sure what you've lost. You don't know what type of data is out there. You don't know how to re-secure that data. You don't know who you have to notify, what you have to change. So that's like a really big pain and hassle, and it's something that's going to be on your mind. So again, prevention is the key here. It affects your brand's reputation. If your site's compromised, if it happens a lot, people are going to start taking notice, and they're going to be like, hey, this is not a site we can necessarily trust. Just think about it from like an e-commerce perspective. If your site gets compromised and there's some type of credit card skimming mechanism on the e-commerce platform that you're using, and users start noticing, hey, every time I buy something from this site, it seems like my credit card information is stolen. I mean, it doesn't even have to be like every time, like just the first time, that happens, users will say, this is not a trustworthy site. And it may not be your fault, right? It isn't your fault. It's not your fault, but users will associate that compromise with your site. And you just don't even want to be in that mix. You don't want to be in that bucket. And finally, fixing a site. Hack site is just difficult. You have to not only fix the site, but you have to find the vulnerability. And finding the vulnerability is really tough. You don't know how people got access, whether it's just like a leaked password or like bad admin credentials or some type of exploit in a plugin that you're using. It's really difficult to fix a hack site and find that vulnerability. So again, that's something that you want to take proactive measures to prevent, so you don't ever have to work on fixing a hack site. So what can you do? The first thing I always tell people is to sign up for Search Console. We here at Google are constantly looking for hack content because we want to protect our users, we want to protect our webmasters, we want to notify our webmasters when we discover something wrong with their site. So if we discover something wrong with your site, we'll send you a message via Search Console. It's an alert for you to help notify you that there's something wrong with your site. We're also constantly creating a lot of new documentation to help you. Recently, we've put out a lot of very specific guides on how to fix some of the top 2 or 3 types of hacks that we've noticed, and we really hope those things help you. And we'll notify you in Search Console that, hey, your site was compromised. Here's all the documentation. Try to figure out like what type of hack happened on your site, and here's some very specific documentation that might be able to help you. So signing up for Search Console is, I think, a really important step. The second thing is just to keep security at the forefront of your strategy. We've talked about this, but security should be just as important as SEO. Or content or building for users, because security is an overarching thing. It covers everything. If there's something wrong with your site, if your site gets compromised, all that work that you put into creating great content and optimizing for your users and doing all these things kind of gets lost. Back up your site regularly. If you're not already doing this, please do this, because one of the quickest ways to recover from a hacked site is just to put up that backup. And just a quick word about backups is, even if you have a good backup and you've restored it, what that likely means is there's still some type of vulnerability left on your site, because if hackers were able to get in the first time, backing up your site to a previous version means that that exploit is probably still available for hackers. So what you really need to do is, even though you back up your site, once you've restored it, if you ever get compromised, is to go back in there, look for vulnerabilities, and patch those holes in. Keep software up to date. This is one of the easiest that you can do. If the CMS platform you're using, if the plugins you're using, if the e-commerce platforms you're using have some type of update, please update. And enable automatic updates wherever you can, because that just takes your mind off of needing to update and helps you focus on other things. And I understand updating isn't as simple as, just update your site. I've talked to a lot of folks that help create websites, website designers or people who are doing SEOs, and they say, hey, my clients, they don't want to update, because if they update now to this new version of the CMS, it's going to break this plugin that's like not really supported anymore, and it's not going to look great, and they're just really hesitant on updating. And I know that's a really frustrating experience for people who help manage websites. But what you have to do is you have to tell the people who own the website, look, security is not something you can compromise on. I know that you like the layout of your site right now. I know that there's certain plugins that work beautifully with your website right now, but we have to patch these security holes. And just letting them know that there are all these calls out there, things like credit card skimming, things like crypto mining, things like spam hacks, malware hacks, just letting them know that these are on the horizon and just showing them what these compromises look like and how it could potentially really affect their site, I think can help them understand, okay, right now, even though it may not be ideal, we need to update these plugins. We need to update the CMS for the e-commerce platforms. We need to do these things. So that's something that you can help educate your clients on as well. And finally, is just consider investing in security software. There's a lot of great things out there. If you're not well-versed in security, or it's something that you don't want to put too much time and effort in, maybe you want to work on optimizing content or working on building your user base, consider investing in some software. Takes your mind off of it. If anything happens, you can go back to the software that you're using and say, like, hey, something's wrong with my site. Can you fix it, or can you tell me what went wrong here? And this is a new thing that we're talking about now. It's just to use two-factor authentication. I think this is good advice for everyone, no matter if you're a webmaster. If you have any type of username/password combinations on anything, anything you want to keep secure, use two-factor authentication where available, because it gives you that second layer of security. These days, there are a lot of usernames and passwords that are being leaked. I can't even count on my hand the number of times that I've heard about some major leak of some major company, right? Like a major business that has my credentials that's leaked now, my password, my username. So with that in mind, you have to say, okay, passwords just aren't as secure anymore. And most people say, yes, so you should use a different password on every account. That's definitely true, but you're going to start losing track. There's a lot of accounts out there. How many can you keep track of? So one of the more secure things to do is just to use two-factor authentication. It takes a couple seconds more. It's kind of a pain. You have to go in your email. You have to look at your phone or like use some type of key. I actually really like those keys. Those are actually really fast, like any type of two-factor authentication key. But it's going to give you that peace of mind. And those 2 extra seconds, that 5 extra seconds is totally worth your time. Two-factor authentication should be used wherever you can. And I know a lot of the major CMS e-commerce platforms all support two-factor authentication now. So please turn that on if I wanted to talk a little bit about HTTPS because people get HTTPS confused with website security. HTTPS is great practice. You definitely want to be moving your site to HTTPS, and one of the reasons I'll talk about in the third bullet point. But just because you have HTTPS on your site doesn't mean that your site is secure from intrusions. This is really more about securing your users' data as it transfers from you to your users and vice versa. So it's related to website security, but it's not going to secure your site. So just keep that in mind. HTTPS is very important, but it's not going to prevent your site from being compromised if there's some type of compromise or vulnerability on your site. And the reason that we want to get everybody to move to HTTPS is Chrome 68 will start marking HTTP sites as non-secure. So this is a huge move that a lot of people in the industry have been moving towards. Everybody understands that moving to the HTTPS protocol is super important. And so we're pushing that along and saying, soon Chrome will be marking HTTP sites as non-secure. So this is going to happen around the end of July. If you go look in this Google security blog, there's details. And also the Google Webmaster Help Center has information about migration, how to make that migration from HTTP to HTTPS really smooth and easy. And if you have any questions, please, ask in the forums. If you have any concerns, please ask me in the Q&A and I can bring that up to the team later. But this is something that's really important that we're moving to. Okay, let's bounce into manual actions, kind of like the other side of the coin, manual actions. So what is a manual action? It's basically the adjustment of a site that is manipulating Google search. I want to highlight that word manipulating because that's really what we're looking for. We're looking for people who are manipulating, trying to game the system. We're not looking for people who are just trying to build a good website and build good content. So manipulative behavior is things that are done to trick search engines. If you're doing specifically just to get a search engine to like you, not based off your content, not based off your users, that is manipulative. So things like cloaking, unnatural links, scraping content, and it isn't limited to a specific set of rules. It's more about a concept. When we have these webmaster guidelines, when we wrote them, we tried to cover all our bases, but people will try to get around things. So it's not a phone book of rules necessarily. It's more about the spirit of it. Are you doing something to manipulate Google? Are you doing something to manipulate search engines in general? That's when we would apply a manual action on a site. I wanted to have a quick word about scraping content because there is this whole idea of like, what is duplicate content? And this goes back to the idea of manipulating search engines. If you're scraping an entire site, let's say you're a news site, you put up a news site, instead of creating your own content, you're just like, hey, let me just like duplicate content from like some type of media provider, some cool website like the BBC, grab all their content, put on my site. I'll rank as well as the BBC, right? Yeah, you might, but that kind of defeats the purpose of having a site. And why would Google want to serve that site that's basically just the BBC instead of BBC, right? So that's, again, this is about the spirit of it. It's not that you're necessarily, just because you're taking content from one place and putting on another. For example, a lot of people ask me, they say, I wrote a really good blog post on my LinkedIn. can I now have that same blog post on my website, my blog, or will Google think it's quote unquote duplicate content and place a manual action on my site? And absolutely not, because you wrote that content and you want to put it on different places. That's totally fine. We're not looking for people who are writing good content and putting it on different places that where they regularly post things. We're looking for people who are manipulating search engines, who are just trying to create content that is not useful for users. So that's just a little bit word about duplicate content. I know a lot of people still kind of get confused about what duplicate content means, and it's really about, are you duplicating things and trying to trick search engines? Are you manipulating search engines or user behavior by duplicating content? So what should you do to understand more about manual actions? Number one is just check Webmaster Guidelines. If you haven't read them recently, give yourself a quick refresh. A lot of good information. We're updating it here and there. We haven't had like a major refresh because the inherent spirit of the Webmaster Guidelines have been quite similar for a while. But we always make a couple changes here and there just to clarify things when we hear feedback about what this means, or like maybe some of our policies may have changed a little bit. If our policies or something major shifts with Webmaster Guidelines, we'll definitely post about it in our Webmaster blog. We'll post about it in Twitter, Google Plus. So follow us there to get really up-to-date information about if there are any major shifts. But if not, just occasionally go brush up on it and make sure that you see everything that you see is still similar to what you've known in the past. Don't be overly concerned with manual actions. Again, this is we're trying to identify manipulative behavior. So there's not a huge reason to say like, oh, is this content, is this way of doing things really going to trigger a manual action? It's more about, am I doing things right for my users instead of search engines? And this is going to be a major thing that I'm going to repeat like several times throughout this talk and during Q&A. So just bear with me there. And then improve ranking by focusing on your users' needs. Look at how your users are using your site, make your website better that way. And technical SEOs is vastly underrated, but extremely important. Making sure everything on your site is functioning the way that it should is just super important, because if Google can't crawl your site or understand your site properly, that's gonna lead to some ranking issues. And so instead of trying to follow maybe not tried and true practices about SEO, focus down on the technical SEO part and see if there are technical things that you can improve on your site in order to make your site better. So if you or someone has a manual action and you're helping them fix that manual action, here are just some quick tips about reconsideration requests. So first off, reconsideration requests are manually reviewed by our team. That's an important thing to know. I used to work on that team that reviews reconsideration requests, so I know that we would look at these reconsideration requests to make sure that people understand what's wrong with their site and how to improve their site, or how to make their site compliant again. A good reconsideration request demonstrates the understanding of the problem. We want to make sure that you understand what happened or what you did wrong with your site, or whoever's site that you're helping fix, because it's important that you've fixed that, right? You need details about how that problem was solved. Bad reconsideration requests, we've seen things like you just submit a blank site, people give up and they're just like, hey, here's a blank site, like there's nothing wrong with my site, right? And we don't tend to look kindly upon that, because it's just like you haven't really made an effort. And a lot of spammers, that's kind of a tactic they'll use. They'll just take down the site and say there's nothing, and then put all that bad content back up. So that's something wrong that we look for. If there's no details about what was changed, not an understanding of my site, what happens, that's kind of a red flag for our team. Or and don't like completely tear down a site. I know that some people, when they get a manual action, it's a bad feeling. I totally get that, and they start poking and prodding at all these things on their site that could potentially be wrong. really read that the message in Search Console about what's wrong with your site. And if you're not sure, if you're still confused, please ask us in the Webmaster Help Forums. That's what the Webmaster Help Forums are there for. And we want to see what people are confused about. If there are pieces of confusion, we want to clarify that. We want to help improve our documentation. So please ask us in the Webmaster Help Forums, or like John Mueller's office hours, or when any of us is doing any type of presentation, please ask us and say, like, these things aren't clear. How can we make this more clear? Because that's what our team is here for. This is really what we want to do. Yeah, so again, if you're not aware, the problems, Webmaster Help Forums, the Google Plus and Twitter on social media, and the Webmaster blog are all good places to look at. Okay, so that's it from me. I really want to hear your questions. I have a couple of questions that users have asked beforehand, so I'm going to try to tackle those. It seems like they're the pressing questions. But before we dive in, human resources, the Webmaster Help Forums, on Twitter, we're at Google WMC, and google.com/webmasters is our portal, our link to everything. It shows you what events that people across the globe are attending, office hours. It gives you information for a help center, what's new going on with Google and the blogs and everything. So please make that your hub for finding information more from Google about what's going on in the Webmaster community. Cool, so just to recap, 3 takeaways. Prioritize web security. I've said that a million times. I'm gonna say it a million times more. Incredibly important. Number 2, follow the Webmaster guidelines. Something that you wanna brush up on and make sure that you understand very well. And number 3, just don't overly fret about making actions. Focus on making a great website, focusing on great content, focus in on the technical SEO aspects of it. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to, I think, Brent, we're going to field some of these questions. Yep. and then
yeah, go ahead and dive into we'll go ahead and dive into those pre-received questions, and then we'll carry on after that, depending on time.
Okay, so the first one is questions about negative SEO. Someone asked, is Google actively solving for negative link attacks? And if a site owner notices this happening, what can they do about it? So the first thing is, yeah, we're very aware of people being concerned about negative SEO. We've dived into it. We've looked at the data to make sure that our systems are not unfairly capturing or unfairly taking action on folks that aren't doing anything wrong and are under a quote unquote negative SEO attack. And this is something that we've actually seen very rarely. I know everybody's very concerned about it. And sometimes what we've noticed too is sometimes like really low quality sites that just, fly by night websites that are really quality start linking to other folks. And you'll see that in your link profile, and you'll think like, oh, wow, this is someone, there's like a negative SEO attack on me. But fly by night sites, they just link out to everyone they can in order to hoping someone will link back to them, or it'll give them some type of reputation boost or something. So those aren't the things that you have to worry about, because we're looking at a linking profile over time. We're very aware that there are a lot of these fly by night folks that are just linking to you. We're aware that there are a lot of weird tactics going on the web. So, I mean, if you ever see it, please let us know, and so we can investigate. I think that's still an important concern. I don't want to say that, I want to be able to get more data about it. I want anybody who's concerned about it to be able to escalate it to us. About, and this is something that we don't want webmasters to worry too much about. If you want to disavow them, if that makes you feel better about disavowing these links, you can do that. But for the most part, if we do see bad links, we're going to ignore them. So there's not a huge need for you to go into that disavow tool and like every day curate it. The reason that our philosophy around the disavow tool is basically if there's a manual action on your site and there's certain links that you can't get rid of because perhaps there was some linking scheme you were involved in back in the day, and these sites are like trying to get you to pay to remove these links or something like that. You know, these really old skeezy tactics that we've seen around. Use the disavow tool on those links. And let's say you picked up a new site, your client used to have some type of weird link scheme they're working on, and you just want to get rid of those links. You just want to say like, hey, like this is bad practice. We need to fix your site. One of the things is to use that disavow tool as well. Secondly is we have location-based content mistaken as cloaking. So depending on visitor location, for example, a visitor from Chicago will see Illinois-based content. Hawaii will see Hawaii-based content. Will this be misconstrued as cloaking? Most of the time, like what we see is conditional serving is on the country language level, and we have hreflang for that. I haven't seen a lot of this location-specific redirects. So that's something that I would want to look a little bit more into and get a little bit more information on for actually doing this and how they're doing it. Because if we haven't really seen it, I can't really give guidance about like how we interpret that quite yet. But generally what I would say is if you have, let's say, a site that serves multiple cities, regions, states, what you should do is you should have a different page for each one of those. Like, for example, if you have like a unique office in Chicago and a unique office in Dallas, and you can give information on that, have different pages for each one of those offices. And then, you know, let the search engines kind of figure out how to direct the users. Yeah, again, if you're seeing any question, if you're doing this and you're seeing any issues, I'd love to hear about it. That's something that we haven't heard about a lot, so that was a pretty interesting question. So, whoever asked that, thanks. Any major updates? There are a lot of incremental updates. Are there major updates still a thing? If so, will we hear about them when they're released? Yeah, I mean, one of the big things that we have going on is page speed in mobile search. We've been talking about that for a while, and I think that's one of the next things that's kind of on the horizon is just have fast mobile pages. That's a pretty big update on our side. If there is any news about major updates, we definitely post about that on the Webmaster blog, as well as on our social media channels like Twitter or Google+. So please keep an eye out for those. We are always updating that content, and we're really trying hard to make sure everybody knows about these updates before they happen, so you have time to prepare for it. We don't like catching people by surprise. So if you look at the blog, if you follow Twitter, if you follow Google+, that's kind of where you'll get information. There are a lot of questions about schema-related manual actions. I know there's a lot of confusion about this, and I think it's something new, but that's something I want to help clarify, and I want to take back to the team if there's any questions about documentation. I saw this kind of repeated theme of people saying there's conflicting information by Google, or there's conflicting information out there. And so we don't want conflicting information. We understand that's confusing. So please, if you ever see that, escalate that over to the Webmaster Help forums, forums like this, office hours, because that's something we really want to help people understand. So one of the schema-related manual action questions for recipe DIY lifestyle bloggers is having more than one recipe card on a page a violation of Google schema best practices. In general, it's fine to have multiple recipes on a page as long as each is marked up separately. So not a concern, nothing that you have to worry about in that regard. Can you confirm again that non-food items should not be written up with recipe schema? Again, a clear statement on this would be great. Marking up pet food or batteries with recipe schema to get next markup seems to be a no-no. Please confirm. Absolutely confirmed. 100% confirmed. If you have non-food items, you should not mark it up with schema. We know that people try to do this, and that is a big no-no. And we have a lot of documentation out there, indicating as such. So we'll be as clear as possible right now and just say absolutely, if you have non-food items, you should not mark it up with recipe schema. Spammy structured data amino actions seem to be on the rise lately. Has there been increased focus in 2018? I don't think there's like an increased focus. I think we're getting more broad and we're figuring out different ways that people are abusing structured data. So that might be what people are noticing. Things that we hadn't really discovered before, we're now discovering, and we're seeing like, hey, people are using really bad tactics for X, Y, or Z. So it's not that there's an increase, it's just we're kind of figuring it out as we go along as well. And so you'll probably see some things that we may not have necessarily messaged for before, messaging for now. And we're really working hard on making the messaging and documentation cleaner and easier to follow, because in the beginning we saw a lot of different types of structured data abuse or schema abuse, and we would just message about it generically because, you know, like we're just seeing a handful here or there. But as people started getting more clever and started doing weirder things, we realized we need to be more clear about it. It's on us to be more clear about what is a violation, what is not, what constitutes an action, what doesn't. And so I look forward to some more clear messaging around that if you're helping users with cleaning up their structured schema related issues. Look forward to more clear information and clear messaging from us about what's going on with your site. Okay, and any trends or problems with HTTPS you're seeing? Any like big things with HTTPS? So as I said earlier, near the end of July in Chrome 68, anything that is non-HTTPS will be marked up as non-secure. So definitely start migrating your sites over to HTTPS if you haven't started that yet.
Eric, I have a quick question on that.
Yeah.
The initial guidance was September for Chrome to start marking not secured. I don't think that was guidance from Google, but it was written up in all the articles across the web, you know, from, you know, pretty established sources. So a lot of timelines have been set based on trying to make sure that happens by September, but now it looks like it's July, which can be concerning for some clients. And also, do you know if any, can you speak to that timeline? And also, do you know if the other browsers are going to follow suit?
I'm not sure about the other browsers, but I will check on the timeline for you. If we said September earlier, then I will talk to the team to see if there's if we had said September earlier and then we moved that timeline up. I actually wasn't aware of that. So thanks for bringing that up. That's something that I will write down to check with the team about and make sure that we're not kind of giving conflicting messages.
And also one thing I think would be good to take back, and other people might be in this case, and sorry this doesn't answer any listener's question, but one of the other things just to remember from Google's side is that some sites are having problems in the e-commerce space because their providers are not capable of updating their technology to HTTPS. So they do a lot of you know, server syncs and SKU syncs and stuff like that. And we've had a couple scenarios where they've said, look, if we switch the links over to HTTPS, it breaks the sync and essentially breaks our whole site. So we don't want to have a non-secure site, but until this other company, you know, and they're in contracts and they're in situations. So what do people do when they're in a situation where they just can't, you know, fix this without spending, you know, $500,000, you know, to fix it? Like these, can they reach out to Google and work something out, or like how do you guys look at that?
Yeah, that's an interesting case, and that probably falls in like a gray area that we haven't really seen yet, or that we're probably actively trying to resolve. I can't speak too much about it, too much about those specific cases, but if there are certain sites that that's happening to, I'd love to get a couple of examples to bring back to the team and say, like,
Sure.
hear specifically why that's happening. So
I have two people are in that case, but I need to reach out to them and make sure it's okay, and then I'll reach out to you privately because
absolutely. Yeah, and if people if anybody else in this broadcast has these issues, please reach out to someone on here, and I'll bring that back to the team so we can kind of figure that out, because that's nothing that I've necessarily heard about, but maybe the team working on it has heard about, and there's ways to kind of mitigate or protect against that. So thanks for bringing that up. Cool. Okay, so that's about it from me for the kind of the questions that were asked before. If anybody has questions on live broadcast, I'd love to hear them.
Awesome. So we do have quite a few questions that have come in. And I want to roll through them kind of quickly because there's quite a few. So, and I think that they're pretty pointed anyway. So somebody brought up a question, can one image on a site be a security risk? Like, can it be as simple as just one image? You know, I know a number of scenarios where images have been a security issue, but I'll let you speak to that. How easy is it for a security issue to exist?
Yeah, for sure. One of the most clever things I've ever seen on a hack site was where they masqueraded a JPEG file. This JPEG file was named like about us or something, about us.jpg. And the person who went into the site and compromised the site added about us _1.jpg, buried it deep into a site, and it executed malicious code. Yeah, I mean, something as simple as an image can really affect your site. So that's kind of like when you get compromised, you'll see kind of these exploits, and that's something that you want to worry about. What I will say also is people who are compromising sites are getting more clever. There's an endless number of ways that people can infiltrate and intrude on a site. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong. But as Google knows about it, as these types of security risks come up, we will announce, we will put it on social media, we will put it on the Google Webmaster blog to let people know that this is happening. And we've run campaigns in the past, #NoHacked, to kind of notify people of new trends and new things that are going on. Like the cryptocurrency thing is like really new and kind of caught us off guard as well.
Awesome. Next question. How do you guys view the syndication of content when it comes to manual actions? If somebody, if you're just syndicating content, maybe it has some bad links in there, or maybe, I don't know what the scenario would be, but the question is, how does syndication of content affect manual actions?
Yeah, I think this goes back to kind of like the duplicate content question. That's really hard for me to answer unless I can kind of see the site, but it's really about the spirit of whether or not this site is bringing value to our users. Like if you're just syndicating content and there's nothing there. If you're like organizing it and adding some commentary about it, giving users like a really good use case for it, I think there's a lot of sites that do that and they do it really well. But if you're just copying a bunch of content from blogs and stuff here or there and just throwing it on your site and saying like, hey, this is my site and come visit my site, first off, it won't do well in search. That's the important thing to understand. Like in general, just copying content, it's not gonna provide you any service in search. But from a manual action perspective, there's a lot of nuance and sometimes when we're looking at the manual action side of it. So nothing specific that I can say about syndication of content other than bring some value to your users rather than just syndicating or copying content across the web.
Do you remember for a while people would do sitemaps as HTML sitemaps on a site, right? You'd have your sitemap.html and it would have all your pages and it would be more visual. Is that something that actually adds value from an SEO standpoint today?
As opposed to having like an XML sitemap
or even in conjunction, like does having a HTML or visual sitemap on a site have a benefit from an SEO standpoint?
I would say like it's fine just to have the XML sitemap. The sitemaps are kind of more for crawlers and search engines to pick up, make sure that we're getting all the content on your site. In general, if you have good internal linking, we're going to get to every page in your site. If, for example, you're not too sure and you just want to do kind of like a sanity check for yourself, you can upload that sitemap in Search Console and have it on your site linked off somewhere. So we'll hit that page and we'll be like, oh, this is a sitemap. Let's call it. The link's in here. HTML sitemap versus XML sitemap, not really a huge difference there. It's just we need to get to your content, and I think that's the main purpose of the sitemap. For your users, if there's for some reason that like your users need to be able to see your sitemap to navigate your site properly, HTML sitemap will definitely help better, because I mean an XML sitemap might render kind of funny, and visually it'll be better for your users if you're like kind of like a repository of a whole bunch of archived documents to have that visual HTML sitemap.
Perfect. Question here is, are some hosting companies more secure than others? I mean, the answer is absolutely. Sometimes people are actually just renting servers and reselling them. They don't update their PHP, versions. They don't, implement any kind of security functionality. I'd like to expand that question, because that doesn't answer like helpfully. Just to say yes. Yes, they are. And I would say I had written down a question. What should we expect from our server company when it comes to security? I'll give an example for anybody listening. I host with TigerTech. I always have. I've been hacked twice, and I didn't know it. And TigerTech reached out to me and said, "Hey, we realized something wasn't our site. We noticed something. We went in and looked. It appears that you got hacked. We reverted back 4 days. We removed all the files for you. You're good to go. Just wanted to let you know this happened." And they've done that twice for me. So I definitely feel like certain companies go above and beyond for like helping you with security. But what questions should somebody ask their server company to make sure they're getting somebody who's going to protect them?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that you should ask of a hosting company is just to ask them, what happens if my site gets hacked? What happens if you detect something wrong with my site? Will you alert me? Will you just let it go and let me fix it? Some hosting companies will even take down your site kind of abruptly because they just don't want to deal with it. So you want to do your research on how they approach security. This is a very important question, and you want to host with someone that does a good job of communicating with you. It doesn't necessarily, if they can help you with fixing it, that's absolutely even better. Some services will even charge a nominal fee to protect you or clean some content up, but make sure that you have all this information up front, so if anything happens, you aren't kind of caught off guard by fees, or on top of being hacked, you're suddenly being charged like lots of money in order to get things fixed.
What about shared hosting? What about shared hosting? Is that something to worry about?
Lots of folks do shared hosting and they do it well. We have seen some types of malware kind of spread through shared hosting, but the people who are in the industry that have been doing it for a long time are very aware of it, and they're always upgrading their systems to make sure things are secure on their side. But we have seen a handful of issues when that happens, and we'll actually go and work with hosting companies to try to help patch some holes or alert them of certain issues. I wouldn't say necessarily that shared hosting is bad. But from a security perspective, there might be a couple more risks. It's just you have to figure that out with the hosting company, and you have to make sure that hosting company is aware of these issues. If you're hosting with someone who's kind of like in the nascent stages and just building out some servers in their basement, they don't even know about these issues going on. That might not be the best strategy if you're building your website. But a lot of folks are actually really well versed in security and hosting in doing shared hosting right. So that's something you just have to kind of figure out with the hosting provider. Again, research is key here. Just do really good research, read reviews, make sure you know from a security perspective what's going on.
Schema question here. Schema for Google reviews. Is it all right to add that to our website?
Schema for Google reviews. So I'm not the best person to ask about schema. I'm going to admit that right. I can find an answer for you about that. So it's schema reviews for Google reviews or schema for
It
Google
says
reviews?
schema for Google reviews. Maybe they're asking if there is a schema for Google reviews, or if,
Yeah.
that would seem to make more sense to me.
Yeah.
Because if there was a schema for Google reviews, then by all means you would be allowed to add it to your website.
Yeah. Not too sure what they mean by that, but I will ask to see if there's something new on the horizon that I haven't heard about.
Okay,
And
well, maybe we can get a follow-up. Whoever asked that question, if you can, expand on that question, we'll see if we can circle back for you.
Yeah.
Another question, I kind of know the answer to this, but we'll ask it anyway. Will moving from HTTP to HTTPS impact my rankings?
We've definitely seen some people who have said like initially there was a kind of an impact, but over time they've recovered really well. I think at this point in time, so many people have done it that there's not a lot that you have to. Well, there are things that you have to worry about. I take that back. It's not that you don't have to worry about it, but there are a lot of best practices out there to help you. There's a lot of examples out there to help you do a really smooth, good migration. I've seen a lot of great talks about this particular migration. I forgot who. There are a couple people who've done talks in presentations about this or documented it really well for really, really large sites of how they're able to do this migration. And everybody has this initial fear that something's going to happen with their ranking, right? I understand that. Moving your site is pretty daunting. It's a little bit scary. But everybody has basically said, we may have seen kind of initial dip, but everything as Google started figuring it out and crawling our site properly, understanding things have moved to HTTPS, which can take some time for a pretty large site. Everything recovered nicely. But if you follow best practices, in Search Console, you notify us that there's a move, good sitemaps, good rel canonicals.
And I'll just pass on as well that if you see a dip and it doesn't recover quickly, you can just message them on Twitter. You can message, the Google Webmaster account, or you can message John or Eric or Gary. All these guys are pretty quick at being like, okay, let me take a look and fix it. I remember when it first started, that was a big initiative to keep the pace. Is that like, if you experience this, we'll help you. So just message them and they'll help you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As we push towards HTTPS everywhere, we want to make sure that people are able to do this smoothly and don't have to worry about too much. So please let us know. Webmaster help forums are also very, very helpful. We're always in there trying to get information about what people are working on and struggling with.
I want to slip one more in for you.
Sure.
A lot of conversation about international regulations. We have GDPR. We have privacy as a core starting to become more important, and now we have the potential meme ban in the EU for copyright kind of restrictions. Is Google going to get into the practice of policing privacy as a search algorithm element, kind of like you have started to do with security and a couple other things?
So I don't know, and because this is a kind of a particularly sensitive issue, I don't want to give you any misinformation about that. I don't know a lot about how we're going to handle some of this regulation. So I do know that we are kind of building advice and documentation on best practices here and there. So please look out for that. I will find out some more information in regards to GDPR or kind of the copyright issues with memes or any of that, and see if I can pass some of that along. But yeah, that's a great question. I know that's on the top of a lot of people's minds. So I'll try to get you some more information, and if I can't right now, I'll ask the team to have some documentation. Perfect. To make sure.
I'm gonna throw in one more because I'm just curious. I've always been curious about this. Reconsideration requests. Obviously, you get a lot, And just
Yeah.
like, it's possible for police officers to start seeing everybody as a criminal, should people be apologetic? Should they take ownership for the problem and be, appeal to your sympathy when applying, or should they be just factual and just focus on the facts?
I personally, when I was reviewing reconsideration requests, we mostly focus in on the facts because it's just like in our minds it's pretty clear, like, hey, this person has violated our webmaster guidelines in a certain way, and here's how it can be fixed, right? So focus in on the facts. If you write a very long reconsideration request, that kind of hurts with our review time because we're going through a lot, right? So if you're writing a whole bunch of stuff, like we only have so much time to skim it. So make it skimmable, right? Make it like a boss to your boss, where they don't necessarily have a lot of time and they're going to skim it, and get the facts right out there, and just let us know what's going on with your site, how you fixed it, and we can work from there.
So the question was, there is a schema for reviews in general, like a general schema for reviews. What they wanted to know is that schema proper to use for Google reviews? Can you use Google reviews in the schema for reviews? And so again, I think you mentioned that that's not an area that you're super, deep into, but it might be, if we're following up on that question, I think that'd be a good, that's the specification on that question.
Okay. Yeah, for all these things that I'm following up on, Brent, I'll send it out to you, and maybe you can put it in like the description or something to answer a couple of these questions.
Absolutely. We'll get it into the recap. We'll get it into that recap post that we'll put out.
Perfect. Perfect.
All right. That kind of runs us right up to our time. We did actually get all our user questions in.
Awesome.
So I think that's great. I know it put us a minute past, but Eric, as always, it's a great pleasure having you. Great information. You're always very candid, very straightforward, and I think it really helps webmasters understand where they fit in the ecosystem and really kind of understand what they can do to do search marketing in a proper and effective way. So we really appreciate your time. I'm sure everybody else does as well. So thank you very much for joining us again. And thanks.
Thank you all.